Okay, I think we're ready to kick off now. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Good afternoon, good evening to all those who have joined us. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think we've had quite a number of interesting sessions in the last 2 weeks, this being week 3. We do have another great founder story session lined up for all of us. Today we are honored to have Kevin Mutiso, who is the co-founder and CEO at Oye. Kevin is an alumni of BimaLab, and his topic is "The Glass is Half Full." And I think this is an exciting topic for all of us to listen to. I do look forward to us having an engaging session. As has previously been the practice, let's put our questions down and be ready to ask them in the last half hour of the session. Kevin and I are going to have a fantastic conversation for the first 1.5 hours of this session that will run from 5 to 7 p.m. And then we shall take your questions after that. I also look forward to a lot of engagement from the audience. I will give you the opportunity to ask your questions. And when I call you up, just unmute yourself unless you're having technical issues. Then do let us know through the chat window that you're having technical issues and are unable to ask your questions. For those who attended the launch in Kigali, Kevin was one of our panelists. And we just felt that he had a lot more to share given the fact that we had limited time there. So I do look forward to this exciting conversation that we're going to have today. So Kevin, welcome. And thank you very much for joining us.
Asante Sana, thank you very much for having me. I hope everyone is well from all over East Africa. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, fantastic. So to kick us off so that I don't waste too much time, because I know everybody is eager to hear from you, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself. Don't forget the fun parts about yourself, what you do for fun, and tell us a little bit about Oye.
Okay. So again, thank you to the BimaLab for having me. My name is Kevin Mutiso, as you all know. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm also the chair of the Digital Financial Services Association of Kenya, which is sort of an advocacy group for digital lenders, which is where I'm originally from. I'm a father of 2. I've got a 14-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. That's what I do for fun, hanging out with them. And yeah, Oye is a very interesting business. So the best way to explain Oye is to tell you a bit of backstory. So you'll give me a few minutes to just let me explain. In 2016, something very interesting happened in my life. I had a business called Samchi Credit that I used to run, and I was a small shareholder. And we were researching how to give loans on digital platforms. At the time, it wasn't very popular. There were only 3 products. What ended up happening was, learning a lot about digital and building digital products. And so in 2020, 4 years after we had set up the business, we had to shut it down. And I'll tell that story a little later on in today's conversation. But one of the key insights was we had realized we had 2 main customer segments in our customer base for our digital lending product. One were the day traders. In Kenya, we call them mamambogas, but these are people who are hawkers, trading at the border, blah, blah, blah. And the other was the boda rider. So the sort of the motor taxi rider. And I had personally experienced the growth of motor taxi because when I was at Samchi, I lent money to somebody to start a lending business for buying bikes. Because what we were doing at the time is we were lending people to buy cars. And this guy came and said, can I borrow a million shillings? This is my business plan. And he already had a product going on and it was very profitable. And at the time, I think there were less than 300,000 bikes in the whole country. Fast forward to 2020, when I'm looking at this data, there are almost 1.7 million riders in the country. So I thought to myself, this is exciting space. If you drive around Kenya, you realize that boda bodas are not liked at all. So that's another opportunity. And so we decided to build an insurance product for them. We then sort of started designing the insurance product, and we would keep going. We sort of set up this focus group of 10 boda boda riders. We had between 10 and 100, but we had this core 10. And every time we came back with an idea, they basically laughed at the idea. And the key insight we gained was that they just didn't trust boda boda, any insurance company. Then I saw on LinkedIn BimaLab. I actually signed up on the BimaLab. Had seen Elias and I were connected. I also reached out to him and told him about what we're trying to do. And we got in. And at BimaLab, I think is where we had the eureka moment, or the aha moment. Because at one of the sessions that we attended that was being led by Richard Leftley, he basically spoke about how apathy is the big problem statement in Africa and emerging markets around insurance. And that what you really need to solve for first before you start selling insurance is giving it out for free, and then figuring out how to get the customer to trust you. And so we thought, wow, that's a brilliant idea. So we went back to the drawing board. We actually reached out to him as a result of BimaLab, and he helped us design a product with a company that he was running at the time. And so Oye, simply put, our mission is to empower boda boda riders. The problem statement we identified was that 36% of all traffic accidents are boda boda related in Kenya. And there were lots of accidents, and there was nothing that was protecting this particular risk from the boda boda rider. So we designed a product where every 90 liters of fuel they consume at our partner petrol stations, they get a free 30-day personal accident cover. And what this cover gives them is 4 main benefits, which is 10,000 shillings refund on hospital bills. We give them a 25,000 shillings last expense cover, 25,000 shillings temporary disability cover, and a 25,000 shillings permanent disability cover, and a 1,250 shillings for up to 8 weeks temporary disability cover. It's been a very exciting journey from start to finish, and well, from start to now. We started on February 24, 2022. We've sold shy of 1 million liters of fuel so far, issued 4,200 policies, and as of today, paid 19 claims to boda boda riders. We are currently at the stage where we are now working towards profitability, and we're tracking well to get there. It's been actually quite an exciting ride. We currently have 20,000 riders on our platform, and we're expanding. So that's Oye.
Thank you. That's quite quite an introduction on Oye. What I'd really like to know is, you said that there was something that happened that made you turn around, what your plans were when you started in 2016, and then things turned around in 2020. I'd like to hear a little bit around what made you make that change. You know what I'm saying? Because as a founder, you're focused on what it is you're going for, but what made you hang in there and strongly believe that, you know what, we can do this and we're going to do this?
That's a good question. So I think let me give you context. Let me tell you the story. So 2016 was one of the best years of my life. We basically started one of the first digital lending businesses in Kenya, probably in the world. As a result, attracted a lot of attention from various actors in the investment world and in Kenya. And we were able to partner with a leading credit bureau here in Kenya. What that gave us was an added advantage in credit scoring. Now, by 2017, people had started understanding what are the key pieces to put together for digital lending products. And, stories around, Fuliza and Mshwari and the profits we're making now were starting to get people excited. But in addition to that, in 2016, 2017, as I said, we raised about $1 million. So we had some room to play and experiment and make mistakes. And so we sort of designed a product that, when I think about it now, may have been a little bit not very strategic, where we were doing naked lending, which basically means you design an app, you get a basic KYC, have your credit scoring, and you basically market the hell out of it, and you wish customers come. Now, starting 2018 is where the rain started to beat us. I love how Africans use that saying. And what happened was in 2018, we suffered massive fraud. And this was an industry-wide problem. In 2018, 30 billion shillings was lost because of fraud in the digital lending industry. And there are different types of fraud, but we lost quite a bit of money. So that was sort of the first punch that made our business not look very viable. And at that point, I decided, that I had put in all this hard work. We had raised $1 million. We've got to figure out how to survive this outcome. And so what I did, as most entrepreneurs should do, is I started cutting costs, and I cut them very thin. So we were running a literal skeleton team for between 2018 and 2020. And in 2018, what we did is we designed and built a whole new technology platform. We launched the product. And in 2019, our objective was basically to lend every day and train our AI algorithm, because the secret sauce we had built was how to design algorithms to lend. Everything went swimmingly well in 2019. And so I thought that I had made the right decision, sticking to my guns, saying that let me make this thing work. We had lost quite a bit of capital by then. We had a skeleton team, but we still had hope in the air. 2020 rolls around. We now have an AI model that we can demonstrate works, and we start talking to banks. One bank gets very interested and actually signs a term sheet with us. And it was a very lucrative term sheet. It was north of $10 million. And that meant that we were now going to be positioned as one of the bigger lenders. And then the magical COVID hit us. In 2019, as I had said, we were already sort of swimming naked, as they say. And it was this deal with the bank that was going to, literally save us. COVID happened. I'll never forget the day. It was the 13th of March, 2020. The president of Kenya made a very interesting speech. In that speech, he changed the rules for credit scoring, basically submission of data to the credit bureaus. He basically made a declaration that all loans that were in default would be technically deleted from the bureau. And he also made, and then the governor of the central bank then made several other declarations thereafter. Those sweeping declarations basically affected the whole market, not just digital lending. It affected banks, it affected SACCOs, it affected microfinance institutions. And people like us who are already swimming naked meant that we were not going to get any additional partners moving forward. Now, here's the part that I left out. In 2018, if you remember, we had raised $1 million in 2016. In 2018, basically, we were left with, say, $150,000, and that's what we were using. And by actually a little bit less, maybe $90,000 by 2019. In 2019 to end of 2020, we were basically, that's what we were surviving on for the whole business, including lending. And so by the end of 2019, because of salaries, because some of the key stuff are quite expensive, we basically had very little left in the bank. And so what happened in 2020, we were left with zero. We had literally $0 in the bank account. And by that point, because I hadn't received a salary because I was sacrificing my salary to pay other people, I was also in significant personal debt because I was trying to ensure that the business survives until a point where we could get a partner. And, so March 2020 happens. I've got, I'd say maybe 10 million shillings, which is about $100,000 of debt, maybe even a little bit more. And I had to figure it out. I had 2 kids in school. I had, obviously, I had a mortgage, and I had all these other things. But I was very lucky. I was very lucky. And this is where I think the glass half full point comes in. One of the key things that happened in my life at the time is I had a very good wife. And I always advise entrepreneurs, have a very good partner, somebody who understands the actual rigmarole of being an entrepreneur. And she sort of gave me a little bit of breathing room from the personal home stuff, and sort of gave me, 3 to 6 months to basically figure out my life. And so what I did in those 6 months is I had a very deep reflective period where I started asking myself the very tough questions that I think anyone who decides to be an entrepreneur should have. At the time, 2020 is about 3 years ago, so I was 33 years old. I had these 2 children. I'd never really worked for anyone before, so I didn't have employment experience. And so I started asking myself, what went wrong with my last business? And, if I was to do it again, what would I do better? And the key, several things, obviously, but the 3 key things that I say that I did wrong were the business model. So the lending business model was dependent on a third party, basically providing lending capital, because we had built this Ferrari of a business, of a lending platform, but never really made money on its own. So we had this asset that was wonderful and could do all these things, but couldn't do anything without a third party sort of plugging in a lot of capital to lend to the market. So I said to myself, next time I'm building a business, the business has to generate cash from day one. And that's a very big lesson, I think, it sounds obvious, but when you're in cutting edge industries like insurtech, fintech, biotech, and all these other things, there's sometimes that thinking that there'll always be somebody who will invest, or there'll always be somebody who, will see the Ferrari you're building. And the only way to prove if your Ferrari is genuinely a Ferrari is if it generates cash, and if it's able to make a profit at some point. The second key mistake I made was the way I hired. I had come from, a business where we got to profitability really quickly before the digital lending business. And so the formula I had sort of created in my head is, once you get to this stage of, the business is able to generate its own profit and be sustainable, is start hiring or raiding the corporate, businesses, Safaricom, some of these bigger names. Why? Because you think they know how to do things better. They probably do, but what they come with is a lot of expense. Um, the problem with these very well good corporates is that they give people very good deals, right? You know, there's good salary, there's good benefits, there's stock options. And when you're a startup trying to match that, you're using a lot of your resources into one person who doesn't have a startup mentality, because the flip side to that is you've got you know, somebody who's got, you know, let's use somebody in legal, for example, in Safaricom. They like somebody senior in legal likely has 2 or 3 associates that's doing deep research. They probably have access to some of the best research material. And so they probably have access to a legal firm and a tax specialist and this specialist. And when you're in a startup environment, you don't have those resources. And so you need somebody who's able to think on their feet, figure something difficult without all the resources required, right? And so that was the second big mistake I made. And then the third big mistake, and I think is the more important one, is when you're an entrepreneur, or rather, when you study entrepreneurs, if you're a fan of entrepreneurship, you must have heard of Charlie Munger, who's the business partner to Warren Buffett. Um, and he speaks about, you know, the venerated dead, you know, the heroes of past times. And so when you read about history and you read, you know, the successful stories of entrepreneurs, one of the key insights you realize very quickly when you do, you know, look at 20 or 30, is that they all had a personal purpose. They had all figured out why they existed on this earth. And up to that point, in 2020, you know, sort of June, when I was doing my reflections, that was a deep realization for me. I'd always been chasing the big money ideas. You know, this fintech is, you know, I was always a little bit ahead, but I could tell fintech was hot. And so we were building these ideas that were going to be hot and everyone was going to be excited and, you know, and I was going to make a lot of money. But I wasn't really thinking about what's the impact that these businesses will have. You know, what's my contribution to humanity? And you know, there's a big business here in Kenya called Farmer's Choice, and I once had the privilege of speaking to him around that time. And he's the one who unlocked it for me, because what he was most proud about was the product where, we all know them when we go out here in Nairobi, these guys who sell smokies or sausages. I mean, these little carts after you go out partying. And he said, you know, we've got 30,000 of those guys out, you know, around Kenya, and they sell these little sausages that we designed in our test kitchen here at Farmer's Choice. And that gives me a lot of joy because 30,000 people are living off a product I produce and are taking care of their families. And so for me, purpose then was sort of like core, like now my next business, I'm going to intertwine it with some purpose that then I have to go deep to find. So the other interesting thing that happened next is then finding that purpose. It's not easy. It's not something that you wake up and know immediately. You sort of really have to go deep into understanding who you are, what you want for your life. One of the things that I learned is, where do you see yourself in 50 years, you know? And that sounds crazy because most of us plan 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, maybe 10, but 50 years is crazy. But it's the truth. You've got to start thinking, you know, I was 33 at the time. When I'm 80 years old, what will I be doing? Where will I be? What will be the things that I look back and say I'm very proud of? And I was certain it wasn't going to be the money I've made. The money is important because definitely it makes life comfortable, but it wasn't going to be the thing that will be, oh my God, that's what it will be likely, my grandchildren or something that, I can say this helped, like the story I gave 30,000, people. And so that for me, so maybe I should tell you what I ended up. So my purpose today, actually, when I distilled it, was 5 things. I said I'm going to be a good father because I think that's a very important job. I said I was going to be a good friend. And, I'm a huge fan of Warren Buffett. So Warren has a famous statement where he says, you want to be the kind of friend you want other people to be to you. So I said, I'm going to be that type of friend to people. I said I was going to be a good Kenyan and a good African. So that's 3 and 4. And then I said, I'm going to be the best entrepreneur of my generation and try to do so. And I figured that if, that's my purpose, I'm comfortable with it, let's start looking for the idea, and then put a small team together, and we started working on Oye. And that's how we got here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you so much for going personal. I see you really went deep in there, and I can see appreciation from the audience and just reading your facial expressions. I mean, it's been a painful journey, but
But it was fun.
yeah,
Also.
yeah. Fun, lessons learned, made some serious decisions about life. I love the aspect of impact and purpose that, like for me, one of the things that I believe in, whatever I do in my career, there has to be an aspect of impact because, I think about it and I'm like, what will people remember me for, And I think that's very important. There's the one thing that you touched around, you had to cut back, you had to, pay off people and all that stuff. I'm just wondering, so you remained with us a lean and mean team, okay? How did you decide on that lean and mean team? That's the first thing. And secondly, what advice would you have for the audience here today around keeping the team motivated, you know, and have a positivity around when things are falling apart, especially the way they fell apart for you at that time? What is it that you did to keep them believing and trusting in you?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So one of the things I did wrong, and probably exacerbated the fall, was I wasn't forthright with some team members when things started falling apart, because you keep hope. So the difference, what I do today very differently, and I've done since, is everyone in the business knows what everything is and where the status, how much cash is in the bank, the state in terms of profitability, where we are with investors, etc. And having that sort of very, very extreme honesty at the early stages of a business and during crisis is important, because if you lose trust with core team members, what tends to happen is because the moment they realize they've lost trust with you, then your leadership is questioned, and every decision after that you make will be met with half-heartedness, you lose morale, blah, blah, blah. That's number one. Number two, what I'd say about um, how do you choose the team is core functions. If you really understand your business, you should know who the key levers and cogs of the business are, and why you need them. So at the time, for example, we needed the CTO, the technical guy who had built the software. So making sure that he stayed on was very important. Of course, we needed to have somebody doing some of the debt collection. And then we sort of had somebody in customer care, because at the time we had about, in 2019, we were sort of servicing 6,000 clients. So you wanted to have somebody on call, you know, when they needed. And then, of course, people underestimate the importance of admin, but admin is so important in compliance. So somebody who could do that for us was very important, so that we don't sort of fall back, because the idea was that we were going to survive, and we wanted to show that even through survival, we sort of kept it, the admin, and held it together. We had accounts, we had paid all our statutory payments, etc, etc. But I think the answer there is everyone knows their business. So if you really think about your different businesses, you know who you need, and you know sort of whose excess capacity, for lack of a better word. And then morale. Morale is just about people are looking to follow a leader. And so and I guess this is why it was also tougher for the last business, we didn't really have a mission, we didn't really have a purpose. Because of that, if we had a purpose, it would be easy to sort of say, guys, this is where we are going, this is what we want to achieve. These are the things we need to do if we work together that we can achieve, and we will get there if we work together. But on the flip side, don't be unkind to the team. These people also have families. Your capital as an entrepreneur is invested, and so you have more to gain if things go well. Some people on your team don't have those luxuries. They've got, maybe they come from a home where they not only pay school fees for themselves, but for the wider family, because they're the only ones who've been able to get education. And that's a very real reality in Kenya and most of Africa. And so there's also that understanding of what's your plan B, who, if I lose this core person, who will replace them, and what will, support the function for the time being. And those are the tough questions you sort of need to answer. I don't think there's a straight answer, but I've tried my best.
Okay. So my next question to you is around, like, I'd really love for you to give us some practical strategies and daily practices that founders can implement, to foster that positive and optimistic mindset, last week we had a speaker who was talking about like the resources you have within the organization, like the people you hire. As a founder, you must be able to have open communication channels, you know what I'm saying, so that anybody can approach you and speak to you. You should constantly be talking to your team members and getting engaged with what's going on. What are some of the things that you find yourself doing on a daily basis, just to keep, to build that resilience within your team, to give them that hope that all is going to be okay, and just to give them that energy to keep coming every day and believing in the dream, that you're trying to build as you work with them?
I think these practices should be practiced whether you are doing well or not. So because what you want for your business is a thing called institutional discipline, right? And discipline starts with the top. So if the head is disciplined, the rest of the team is disciplined. And so one of the things we do is we have 2 stand-up meetings every week. One is at 7 a.m. on Tuesdays, and one is at 3:30 p.m. on Fridays. These stand-up meetings have very clear objectives, what you're meant to do. And the Tuesday one is basically everyone gives everyone an update of what they're working on, so that everyone else in the team knows what's happening in other departments. Because what happens in the startup is that everyone's so focused on a core function, because you're such a lean team, is you sort of sometimes forget what the other piece is doing and why it's important that they are successful as well. Now, when you run these meetings, you've got to run them on time. So if it's 7 a.m., it's a 7 a.m. start. You don't wait for anyone. If somebody's late, let them find you in the meeting already. Don't wait for them. What that does is that next time the person comes late, they'll be embarrassed because somebody's going to call them out. And then once the discipline is in, it's in. The other thing is don't overthink your communication channels. What matters is, because if you, let me give you the context. in Oye, for example, we've got agents on the ground and we've got me as CEO. If your team does not know how to use Slack, WhatsApp is fine, right? Because there's this obsession of, no, this is the better this is the better that. Use what works, right? So communication is key. What is the objective? The objective is that if there's a problem at any part of the business that needs your attention, because the type of decision that needs to be made at that point it's only you who can make it, then that decision needs to come to you as quickly as possible in whatever form. It doesn't matter, because if you focus on blame game structures, which is how come you didn't tell me, who's in charge of that, what starts happening is cover your ass mentality, CYA. And that's something you never want in a startup. You want to make sure that communication, tough decisions are coming to you urgently and you're able to execute efficiently. That's a big one. That's the second one. The third, I'd say, is keep talking to each team member. So a CEO is actually sort of playing a very strategic game. And if you think of your team as a team, not a family, I really hate the term family in business because we're not a family. We're actually a team. We're a sports team. Messi doesn't want to play with Kevin Mutiso, who's big in his team. But we could, if I was his brother, he'd still love me, if you get what I'm trying to say. And so the CEO is playing like he's a coach. So it's you understanding what is your team's strength, what are your team's strengths, what are your team's weaknesses, what are their insecurities, and then what are their what environments do they thrive in? How do you get that mental strength and their creative juices and their best performance? And the only way to do that is to coach. So make sure you keep having continuous one-on-one sessions, particularly with your core team. I actually talk to my team minimum once a week, because I always want to know, where's your head at? How's life? What's happening at home? You find with younger men, discipline is usually an issue. So you've got to keep bringing that discipline back. If you've got a young mother in the team, or you've got a mother with many kids, time management is an issue. But you want to be the person supporting them rather than giving them pressure because of that nuance. So if the younger guy says, and that's why I have the Tuesday 7 a.m. because I want to make sure that everyone is awake at 7 a.m. And fresh, right? Because it's a tough meeting. There's no joking, in the meeting, but we're making decisions and we're moving. So those are the three core things for the team. For the business, because you've also got other stakeholders. You've got, sometimes you're going under and you've got a supplier you haven't paid, but you need that supplier to continue supplying. That's a different conversation. The best case scenario is you go and have an honest conversation with the key decision maker on the other side. Tell them the truth and tell them to give you some rope. That's the sort of the language we use. Give me some rope, and then understand how far the rope is, and then you figure out how you're going to make it work. If you find a tough nut, or you have a difficult supplier, and it's going to be very difficult for you to move suppliers, you also then have to plan it strategically, because what you never want to do is lose trust with suppliers. In business, what you never want to do is lose trust, right? And then investors communicate. With Oye, the discipline we've created is we think like a listed company. What does a listed company have to do every quarter? Every quarter, it has to report to shareholders the status of the business, good or bad. And yeah, and the trick I use here is that I never use flowery language. So I'll never say we had excellent results or we had, I just give factual data in a way that the shareholders can understand. And if I need help, I'll let them know we need help. If we don't need help, we'll, we need some kind of resource, we'll let them know. And that's technically how you sort of manage the business, I think, during tough and good times.
Okay. I noticed the word trust. Trust keeps coming up, whether you're dealing with people, whether you're dealing with other organizations, whichever way, when you're running a business and as a startup, you're always dealing with people. It's a service to the people. You have suppliers that you always need to engage with. So trust and communication, I noticed, are two big things that are coming from your end. What I'd like to know, though, is when things are not looking very good for you, when you really feel you're in the trenches, you as a founder, how do you get to communicate, or what are some of the tips and tricks that you use to communicate news that is really bad, or wrap yourself around how do you prepare yourself to communicate really bad news? How do you position it? Because it's not always going to be rosy, as you said, but you've walked the journey. So it would be great to hear from a personal perspective how you get yourself to do all this.
So my strategy is actually very straightforward. Is bad news, you rip the band-aid off, right? The pain is coming. So I'm one of, and this is my sort of view, but if I was in a team, I always say, if I was in a team, give me the pain immediately. And so if you're having tough conversations with shareholders, tell them the most painful truth at the beginning of the meeting. Don't wait till the end. If you have to lay off people, make sure that your compliance is okay, because usually you don't want to be countersued or whatever. But most times, 99% of your team are people who will understand. But yeah, just rip the band-aid, say the truth. It makes life a lot easier. But dealing with people is tough. And the insight I've learned, and this is, I kid you not, with a lot of years of practice, because I'm a very aggressive personality, is learn how to listen. That's usually the trick. And I'm talking to entrepreneurs, so I'm not embarrassed, but most people love talking and they love listening to their own voice. And that's just a natural human trait. And so if you don't have to be the first to speak, don't speak. Learn how to just listen. The story I like to give here is something I learned from advocacy. Our association was the one that passed, or negotiated rather, the digital lending regulations that are in place today. And very, early on in the process, we formed the association in 2018. One of the things that I had always thought, because it was my first time really engaging with government, was that government is one big amorphous animal or machine. That an MP is similar to a PS, is similar to a minister, is similar to a policeman. And the truth is that they're very different. Very quickly, I learned that the executive, and executive means the civil service, actually really dislikes the legislative. So that's the parliamentarians and senators. And once you listen to both sides, and you see how things work, because the observation is key. You realize, actually the way I should approach a parliamentarian when lobbying for specific things is very different from how you speak to, say, a regulator. A regulator is there to support and nurture, in the sense of Their job is to make sure that the consumer is protected. In fact, that's usually the underlying, and then they have different mandates depending on the type of regulator they are. But usually it's consumer protection and market stability. And then on the flip side, it's making sure the businesses thrive in a fair environment. So that the conversation, if you go with a very, antagonistic approach to a regulator who's supposed to be nurturing you, for lack of a better word, they'll also take a very antagonistic view against you. Whereas the parliamentarians, that is a natural state of being, to be antagonistic, because they're constantly baiting and posturing and taking sides, and managing interests, because that's just the job of a politician. Um, you know, and then so that I think I hope that's a good story on just like understanding how different people and different stakeholders matter to an ecosystem. I hope that answers the question.
Yes and no, because I was more interested in how you personally prepare, to be able to communicate, but you answered it earlier on, and also just went into when you're communicating to different profiles of people, how to engage them. It's important that you understand that different people need different types of engagement. Like if you're going to anything to do with government, you need to think about advocacy and all that, and in this program we also have regulators who BimaLab has partnered with. So it is important that the cohort that we have here also understand how to engage with regulators for them to be able to support and push policy and work with them hand in hand. So my next question is around the balance between optimism and realistic expectations. You know what I'm saying? So how does a founder evaluate that, with regards to their progress and making strategic decisions? Because, when as a founder, you're there, you're driving this, Ferrari, as you keep talking about, you're moving with this Ferrari at this high speed. But, at some point you need to make strategic decisions, and you have to be optimistic and you have to be realistic in order for you to look at your glass half full, you know? So how do you strike a balance between those two as a founder?
Strike a balance. So that's a very good question, because I realize I forgot to add something in one of your previous questions, so I'll bring it up here. Um, the CEO or the leader of a business or a founder should be thinking strategically always. And that's why one of the key team members you should always have is a good tactical thinker. Because if you're a good strategic thinker, it's very rare that you're also a good tactical thinker. It's very rare to find people who have those two skills. And if you do find them, show me, because I want to be their partner. So what's my point? My point is you need to always have an eye on the future and understand what are the key things happening that could affect your business. There's the famous question that Masayoshi Son asks every founder that he invests in. He says, what's the one thing that could kill your business? And you really need to understand what that thing is at every given stage of your business, because there is something. And when you're a startup, in the ideation and experimentation and probably part of the scale phase, you really don't have a defensible revenue yet, because you've not matured. You're not set in the market. You've not set your position, as an incumbent, or as a mature business. So you really need to have a clear understanding of what could kill your business, and constantly work as a strategic thinker in the business as to what do we need to do to ensure that that becomes less and less of an issue over time, so that you have a different issue. And my favorite businesses in the world today are the American banks. If you know the size of JP Morgan today, if JP Morgan collapses, the financial markets are down. So what they figured out is they figured out that one day we're going to be too big to fail. And that's their moat. And that's how they defend. Um, um, and if you want to figure out how to defend, I forget the name of the book, but there's a book called The Seven Powers, and it talks about brand switching, cost. I can't remember the others at the moment, but it's a very good book to understand how to build these um, um, defensible revenue streams. Now, and that's how you sort of strike the balance between optimism and pragmatism. The entrepreneur has to be eternally optimistic. You must always believe you're going to win, because 80% of the battle is in your mind. So if you don't believe it, then everyone else, the business will feel it. But if you believe it, then it'll cascade to the rest of the team. So the 20% means that you as an entrepreneur then have to have the fear of death managing you on the other side. Like, what is that thing that's going to kill us? And then the tactical thinker is making sure that you're keeping the momentum going, which is the point I wanted to bring out earlier that I forgot. Is how do you keep your team, morale? Is make sure the business has a momentum. You want to keep having a win every quarter. So in my business, I'm trying to have a win every quarter. And that win is something that the team should own, so that they feel like in January we were here, in April we are here, in July we are here. And then, and then when they look back, they can see milestones that they have achieved. And that's another way to strike that balance. Keep making sure that are you achieving those milestones? Because at some point, if you lose steam, the business also tells you, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
And it's very interesting that you talk about milestones and achieving, and because one of the workshops that the ventures are going have gone through already is how to put your KPIs and your progression and how to measure that. So it is very important that it is clear that to the founders sitting in this session today, that those milestones should actually have very clear ways of measuring them. Okay. And you must also communicate to the team and make sure they own and understand why. There has to be some level of ownership. Okay. And I think it's also important for them to also be part of the victory as they achieve the milestones,
Exactly.
So there's also, so there's also the part where you celebrate every milestone every quarter. And of course, one has to be realistic about it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing is that I wanted to ask you is about how do you look at yourself as a business? So 2016, you started this journey. 2018, 2019, things started changing that, almost made things fall apart for you when you went into debt. 2020, you had COVID. Now moving forward, I believe things are looking up, hence the energy and, you having this amazing story to share and still sitting here, and pushing on Oye as, and rejigging the company and pushing on Oye today as a co-founder and a CEO. I'd just like to know, how do you look and what are you looking at as your long-term success, and how do you intend to achieve that, considering the challenges that you have faced so far? When you reflect back, what kind of journey do you see ahead? Yeah. And even as you're processing and trying to understand the question that I'm asking, I'm just going to let the audience know that you can start throwing your questions in the window, unless Kevin is very clear with his communication that there are no questions. But let's start throwing questions in the window so that in about 30 minutes, we're able to take those questions. And if there are too many, we can start a bit earlier. But I'd just like to understand from you, Kevin, and I don't know if I'm being clear, how are you able to define where you're going ahead, looking forward, based on the journey you've had in the past?
So I'll answer that question in two ways. So the technical answer is entrepreneurship is a sport like any other. And so you sort of look, so for me, my goal is to be the best entrepreneur of my generation. And so I've actually spent quite a bit of time studying entrepreneurs since the 1600s. And the certain patterns that you get, and you're trying to figure out what's the perfect business. So the perfect business is a business that survives. And a business that survives tough times basically means it's still generating cash, positive cash flow, um, and can even grow during those tough times. So my benchmark is Berkshire Hathaway. It's a business that started as a mill for making textile mill, and then over sort of 60, 70 years has built an impressive asset base of diverse businesses that basically survive any kind of storm. So 2008, they came out swimming after the crisis. 20 COVID, they came out swimming after the crisis. Why? Because they've designed the business, and I'm getting technical here. One, it's a permanent capital structure. So what that means is that it is listed on a stock exchange but does not pay out dividends. And so they take advantage of compound effect. And so over time, what they've done is by reinvesting the capital they generate from their businesses, they're able to, um, you know, if you look at compounding, it's magical. You move from 2 times 2 to, very quickly to 1,000 number in very few steps. And so they've been able to do that with money. And the reason it's amazing is because as shareholders, they can exchange that value without having interrupting the business, which is why it's a permanent cap. So my vision is to build a permanent capital structure using OA as the anchor product, and then over time building various assets um, in the business that generate cash and survive the tough times. The more human answer is, as I said, I'm an entrepreneur, and I really do love business. It's my obsession. And so for me, what I want to do is have a balanced life. And so the way I see the future is Kenya and Africa is raw, fertile ground. Um, I'm very fortunate to have observed two industries growing in Kenya firsthand. That's digital lending and what we call credit-only lending. When I started out in 2011 on the credit-only, we were probably 5 or 6. Now we provide, those types of institutions provide 20 to 30% of debt to MSMEs. When we started digital lending, we were 3, digital lenders. I was or maybe 4, and only 2 of us were Kenyans. Everyone else was foreign. And so the benefit I have from those 2 experiences is that I see Kenya's various industries as very ripe for takeover, for lack of a better word. There's a lot of room for building a lot of value. And so my objective now is having that balanced life. Well, the motto I say in my house is building billion-dollar businesses, because I see there are 20 to 30 billion-dollar businesses waiting to be built in Kenya alone, and probably 100 in East Africa, and probably 500 in Africa. So just being part of that. I don't know how to close this out, but the reality is that it's a hard, I want to make sure that I make it clear that entrepreneurship is not a walk in the park. Um, there's an actor called Denzel Washington. He loves saying that, you know, you've got to be committed to start, but you only consistency gets you to the finish line. So once you agree to start and commit to start, the discipline is the most important thing to get you to the finish line. It's not the eureka ideas that make you successful. It's the continuous consistency and putting in the work that gets you to the finish line. And that's entrepreneurship. And so if you have a goal, use the rule of compounding, and push, you should get to the success line.
Okay. So another question for you from my end. So, you know, there's, you know, for you to be a founder or an entrepreneur, you have to have some level of confidence. You know what I'm saying? You have to have self-discipline. You have to have self-belief in whatever it is that you're pushing into the market, and you strongly believe that you're going to make it. So how does that work for you in creating that or maintaining that positive mindset? Okay, that's the first part of the question. So you said that you talked about something to do with um, people should, a founder should learn how to listen. People love to talk. They love the sound of their voice. Yeah. Also, you mentioned that, yes, you love to talk as well. But when it gets to a point where you need to communicate some bad news, you will sit back and listen and then communicate what you have to communicate. Okay. But how does that tie back into, you know, like your confidence, you know, like when you have that bad news to communicate and you're feeling low, and you know, you're like, what am I going to do with my, you know, my self-confidence has been hurt, my ego has been hurt, my belief, you know, everything is falling apart. Okay, how do you use all that to maintain a positive mindset? So that's the first part of my question. And then the second part of my question is, you know, as a founder and as a CEO, you know, you're always filling other people's cups. Okay, but there's always, you have to have your cup filled. What do you do to make sure that your cup is filled so that you're able to give and keep giving, and, you know, building that resilience and keeping that positive mindset within your organization?
Um, I'll get a little bit technical again because I spend a lot of time thinking about this for personal use. So self-confidence. Confidence, the best confidence comes from knowing that you can do it because you've done it before, right? And that's why discipline is so important. So the best example I can give is, if you want to build your confidence, set yourself a goal, an achievable goal every day, and then sort of pat yourself on the back. So I'll tell you what I do for free. I have 3 rules for my personal day. I say I'm going to sleep by 10:30, no screens in the bedroom. I'm going to wake up by 7:30 on the first alarm, so that you know, because the brain just doesn't, once you start losing in the morning, that the game is, you want to eat the frog in the morning, so you want to make a good decision in the first decision you make in the day. So when you hear alarm, you want to wake up immediately, and then do some physical exercise. And I swim, so I say I'll do a minimum of X number of laps every day. And I tell myself, if I do those each of those is 33%. And if I do 33%, I got 99% for the day. And if I did 2, I got 66% for the day, which is a B. And if I did only one, I got 33%, which is a fail. And so then if I have a day that I fail, the next day, by the time I'm sleeping, I'm psyching myself up and saying, I've got to do better than yesterday, right? So that's how I keep the positive mindset, because you've got to keep winning and you've got to create these achievable goals for yourself so that you believe that you can do it, because that's the trick. In terms of there's an additional piece, which is self-awareness. Understanding of self is key, because you must understand that there are three things that make you behave in specific ways. The first is ego, and ego is that voice that tells you that you can't do something or you can do something, but without any tangible evidence. It just comes from, I feel it. There's bias, and bias is that hard-coded programming that we all got from either religion, growing up, environment, and then there's fear. And people think fear is a bad thing, but fear, we actually evolved. Fear, we have fear in our evolutionary process because it gave us a sense of danger. So it's a very good thing because it's your warning system. So don't ever think fear is a bad thing. What you need to do is understand what you're fearing. Because there's some things that you fear because of ego that hold you back. And there's sometimes the fear is good because it's warning you, right? Now, the tricks for managing all those three is different for different people. But if you can manage your ego, it's a very powerful tool, because there's some situations where you need that over-aggressive self. And the best example is if you look at athletes, if you look Michael Jordan, Muhammad Ali, they'd say all these very egotistical statements. But what they're doing is they're firing themselves up, because if you're getting into a fight, right, you've got to be the most, crazy version of yourself to win. The best way to solve for bias is expensive, but it's great. It's travel. One of the benefits of being an entrepreneur in cutting edge industries is I've gotten to travel the world. So you get to see how different people are programmed, for lack of a better term, and you realize how alike you are to them and how alike they are to you, and how your different nuances make you make decisions differently. And that's a very important thing. And then, of course, fear is a thing of just understanding what are those things you fear. And then knowing how to identify when it's fear that's holding you back or it's fear that's warning you. And then you spoke about the feeling of the cup. That's a good question, and actually, I should also have brought it up before. It's a very emotionally draining job to be an entrepreneur, because you're always constantly managing stakeholders. And the stakeholders, everyone from the customer to the employee to the shareholder to the regulator, blah, 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 blah. The best thing is to have a support system. As I said, I went back into history. Most good entrepreneurs had very good partners. In fact, would never, and when I say partner, I mean spouse, because some of the best entrepreneurs were women. And so they had a very good spouse supporting them. And supporting could be is relative to everyone. Make sure that you've got a exercise regimen, because you only have one body. So you've got to sort of keep that body in shape, and it keeps your mind sharp. And then identify your, 5 or 10 friends that, no matter what happens, they're always going to stick with you, and make sure you make time for those friends. And then I always say, find that thing that, make sure you have some alone time at least once a week, where you think about everything and anything and nothing all at the same time. 30 minutes, I normally take the Sunday morning break there, where everyone's at church, and everyone's moving around in the, it seems like no one really cares about where Kevin is in the stakeholder ecosystem that Kevin manages. And so I usually take that time and I do something that I enjoy, whatever it is. Um, and I think about nothing, everything, and all at the same time. I find it very refreshing. I think those are the key things: friends, family, and then some alone time to just decompress.
Okay, that's very interesting. This part of the sometimes as an entrepreneur, one would take it very lightly around like the family and friends, because you always hear this statement where you haven't seen somebody in so long and they're always saying, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, my business, I'm so busy, not realizing that that's actually an important aspect of making you successful. You need to refill your cup. On that self-awareness, that ego bias and fear, I think the two biggest things that we suffer from as human beings is ego and fear. And more so ego, that point where you cannot even be vulnerable enough to say, I need help, or things are falling apart. My glass, I'm seeing it as half empty and no longer half full, that kind of stuff. So, it's important that people understand what role that plays in who you are, especially in your self-awareness. I read somewhere that you want to give me that figure. What is the figure you talk about? How many millions?
So which one? There's two figures I say that I only built
In
one
10
billion. Like
years?
no,
Yes.
yeah, I only built $1 billion businesses.
Yes,
And
yes.
yeah, that's
Yes.
that's what I've decided, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I love that of you only build billion-dollar businesses. Okay. So building billion-dollar businesses in the next decade. That's what you want to do, right? How many years are we into the decade? When did you start
Three,
counting? 3
2020.
years. 2020. And I'd like to know how is that journey feeling, and how are you feeling about it as Kevin Mutiso today? Do you feel like you need to scrap those numbers, or you're still focused on that billion-dollar journey in
I
Africa?
think we're on track.
Yeah,
I think we're on
that's
track.
fantastic. Hmm.
We, as I said, one of, maybe I should have shared this. I started being an entrepreneur when I was 12 years old. I was very fortunate. So I've actually done business since I was 12. So um, that's almost 23 years of life in selling stuff, trying to build something. And I think we have finally found our purpose. And we're on track. I've built a good support system. I've got the discipline, the institutional discipline has been built into the business and is continuously being improved. I've got great mentors. Um, I've got great advisors. I've got a great team. So, and then we're at that age where this is the best time to be building this stuff. You're going through a massive transition globally. You've got incumbents who are 60. I always tell people, if you look at the people who've passed away in the last sort of 10 years, they were titans of, domains, literally, with vacuums looking to be filled. You've got 1 million kids graduating from high school every year in Kenya. They've got a smartphone. You've got all these new markets that were never being served, or didn't even exist 10 years ago. And so we think we're on the right track. Borders, as I said, 300,000 2013, 2.3 million today, 10 million by 2020 to 2030. Um, we're going to be part of that growth. There's transition to EV, so we're going to be part of that growth. There's all these new digital financial services. The regulators are becoming more open. And so, yeah, and so if we had more time, I'd tell you the story for OA bit by bit, and how we see that, how we are tracking towards that number, and you'd see that we're on track.
So, Kevin, my last question to you is just looking at the current economic situation globally. We seem to be going through some kind of downturn. Does that bother you in any way? Have you thought about how you're going to protect your business in case anything happens? You talk about $1 billion. We see the dollar, is having a bit of an issue. How do you feel about all this being a founder of a business?
The global outlook. So people are saying it's a downturn. I'm saying it's a shift. And so COVID broke the system, and the system is reattaching. And so they say luck is when opportunity meets preparedness. And so what I'd say is what we are doing in our business is making sure that we are prepared for these opportunities that come, right? And that's how we're going to best protect our business in the short and medium term. And once our businesses have built a position in the market that is defensible, then that'll be another different stage where now we are making sure we are the next incumbent in the game. So that's the objective now. So that's how I look at it. An entrepreneur should look at time as an asset, not as an enemy. So time is your weapon. So they actually say, I forget who said it, I think it was JP Morgan. The actual like the key, that understanding of timing is that thing that makes you extra successful, because you understand the best time to start a game, when to sort of go through the different phases, and then when to start defending a position, because you've understood that you now have a position to defend. So that's how I look at it. I think it's a very exciting time, actually, not a scary
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and guess what? I mean, if you ask me today, being in the insurance business, especially as an insurtech, this is the right time because technology is the game changer, and what it does, it brings down all those walls and makes it possible for you to be able to trade anywhere. And because of just as you're saying, the economy is now recovering. From your perspective, the way you look at it, anybody who's in insurance, it means that for future sake, people will start taking up insurance to protect themselves. Yeah. And what is the best way to do this? It should be accessible to you on any device, anywhere, at any time. And this is what InsurTech enables from that perspective. And it should be scalable to anybody, anywhere, and affordable. Now, what I'm going to do, Kevin, is I'm just going to pause there for a little bit and ask if there are any questions. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat window, but maybe somebody wants to ask a question verbally. Maybe you can just put up your hand and then I'll call you out and give you the opportunity to ask your question. Any questions from anybody? Maybe Kevin, you and I have been talking to each other, having our own conversation here. Okay, I see Mohammed has a question. Okay, Mohammed Mansour, maybe you can ask your question, and then Pazian, I'll give you an opportunity after that. Just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes. Hi, Laura.
I'm good,
I
Mohammed.
have
Good to hear your voice.
me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Hi, Kevin. I have a quick question for you. Talking about low income drivers and low income Buddha riders, because in my country too we have low income drivers, but insurance, it's not in their priority list, even on the list. It's not an option for them. They never even cross the idea of insurance. It doesn't cross their minds, How could you manage to put it on the list? How could you manage to make it a priority? Is it just because of I remember your model that gas stations may pay for the premium. Is it how it worked for you, or there are another tricks or works around that you managed to put it in their priority list by doing it?
Thank you, Mohammed. Kevin, we'll take one more question from Pazian. Pazian, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hello. Yes. Thank you for that, Kevin. That was really interesting, and I'm glad, particularly when it comes to communicating across the line, especially when things are not that great, whether it's because of external or internal. But how do you manage expectations, particularly with investors? Because I mean, from the VC world, there's always growth pressure, but at the same time, you want to build a company that's actually growing practically, which currently, I mean, we've seen in the media, the VC landscape within the Valley, Silicon Valley, is being challenged because certain level of growth are not really practical or achievable. So how do you manage to do that? And then the second aspect of that is, are all your investors local? By local, meaning that they understand Africa and in the African business environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Pazian. Kevin, you can go ahead as we wait for the rest of the questions and answer those ones.
Okay, so the first is to Mohammed. Thank you very much for that question. So I don't think my customers are low income. My customer earns about $50 a day. In the Kenyan context, that means they're pretty much low to middle income, because the GDP per capita is about $140 a month. So in 3 days, they sort of made that money. I think for us, what we did differently is we built trust. We focused on the problem and solved the problem for them, because the reality is that there are several products, there are several border ideas, but no one has really focused on trying to build trust with the border rider. So when we were doing our focus groups, I'll give you an example of something that's happening now. By law, a border rider should have third-party insurance in Kenya. The numbers are scaringly low for how many riders actually have that kind of cover. If you speak to the insurance companies and you look at the pricing vis-a-vis the claims ratio, I think it's crazy. It's too low. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense how low those prices are. So when we went to the market and we started testing to see if there was an opportunity for us to sell the product, we quickly realized that undercutting is the name of the game in these types of products. And so everywhere we went to get sort of feedback, we would be told things like, no, we're getting this kind of commission, we're getting that kind of commission. And then lo and behold, in May this year, 2 of the big providers basically stopped the product across the board. So what's my point? My point is, because the current system is designed basically in a very selfish way, which is the brokers and the insurance companies are trying to maximize the amount of money they make, rather than actually thinking, how do I solve this problem for the border rider? What that has done is that the border rider does not want to buy insurance because they don't believe that the insurance will help them. And so that's exactly the approach we used. We went to a partner that we thought we trust, and I told you I met them on BimaLab. We then designed this product, and when the first claim came, we paid it. When the second claim came, we paid it. And when the 19th claim came, we paid it. We paid it without harassing the customer. We make the customer feel like they're important. And if you go to certain neighborhoods in Nairobi, and you say Oye, and they see a marketing SMS from Oye, it actually makes them happy because they know, the thing is, they know they're about to get something because they know we're always looking after them. And that's the trust we wanted to build. And just to repeat, I actually don't think they are low income. They just don't live the high life. They look at money in a very different way. $50 a day is quite a bit of money. And the top 1% of riders make up to $200 a day, and still live in low income neighborhoods comfortably. How do you manage investors? This is a tough question, and I've learned a lot of lessons along the years. Any investor who's pushing you for growth instead of sustainability is not the kind of investor you want. And I know that's difficult to say in this part of the world, because what I'm basically saying is don't accept money that could potentially help your business survive a little bit longer. So that's the calculation you've got to make in your head, is how much stress am I willing to take to keep the business to survive until the point it's sustainable? Because once you figure out how to make the business profitable, everyone's happy. You know, when money's coming in, everyone's excited. It's when you're losing money in the early days, everyone seems to think they have a better way to do it. And what you need to demonstrate to investors is that you got it under control and that you know what you're doing. And the best way to demonstrate that is by communicating regularly. As I said, I communicate with mine quarterly, and then making sure that the momentum of the business is evident to both the team and the investors, because progress is something that can be seen and felt, you know, regardless. And so, you know, if it's a contract, if it's numbers, you know, growth in numbers, if it's growth in cash flow, you know, that's what you want to show. And so, you know, just quickly, you know, Oye in 2021 had no product and had 2 investors who had put in quite a bit of capital at that point. And the objective was, Kevin, figure it out. We're giving you 12 months. In 12 months, if there's nothing to show for it, we shut down the business. 12 months later, we had gone through BimaLab, we had a product. We hadn't launched yet, we didn't even have 1 customer, right? But we had shown progress. And then the next 2 years between Feb 22, as I said, February 2022, and now, what we were doing is what we call experimentation, right? So getting some key data sets and insights to now make us figure out, okay, what do we need to do to make us commercially viable? And we're pretty much at the phase of completing we're getting closer to getting to profitability, you know, on what we call unit economics. And so that progress is what's given our investors hope. So right now we have 14 investors. We're currently raising an additional $1 million. We're pretty much halfway in terms of either commitments or received. And, you know, the way we structured it is, the lesson I learned from my last business is local investors have no clue what VC investing is. So I've made sure that in this business, I've got slots specifically for local investors. And what I'm doing is I'm giving them what I call bite-sized chunks. So they can invest $5,000, $10,000, which is not so much capital from my perspective. But what I want to show them is the journey that it takes to move from ideation to experimentation to scale, then maturation. And so I have about 6 investors that I'm walking that journey with. And then I've got what I call the institutional investors who invest, larger sums of capital. The truth is you not find many locals, and that's why you have the issue of white founders being funded more often, because they come from ecosystems that, and then they also know those people and they probably went the same schools. But the truth is also that money doesn't chase good ideas, right? Money chases good ideas, not the other way around. So if you're onto something, people want to give you money. My advice is take money from, if you can. I mean, this is I'm speaking like we're flat with cash. We're not, but if you can, your best investor is a family office of an entrepreneurial family. So somebody who knows the science and the art of entrepreneurship. Because what we also have are investors who are investors who take third-party funds and promise that they're going to deliver a return. And a lot of times that money is not theirs. And so they also have a pressure. So those are normally the worst kind of investors because they want you to perform a miracle. And by forcing you to perform this miracle, they technically kill the business over time. And so it's finding those good investors. And even in my local investor base, I only speak to people who have, invested and investors. Because you don't want to take somebody's $10,000 and, that's school fees for their child next month. That's also going to be somebody who's going to give you a lot of pressure. So you want to, and that's the sad reality. You want to, I'm basically speak to real rich people. Which it's a weird thing to say, but those are the best type of investors, not the people who have third-party funds to invest. I hope that.
Okay, Kevin. Yeah, okay, thank you. So we have 2 more questions. I see a question from Samo. Samo, do you want to ask your question? And then Abel will go thereafter.
Kevin, as always, really great to listen to your story. I mean, I can listen the whole evening. My question is really just, you kind of hinted at it, and maybe I'm just curious to sort of listen to that a lot more. When you think about the product in terms of where you are now and where you're going, how do you sort of see it evolving? Maybe even in terms of like, do you see insurance like sort of, I mean, personal insurance touches on a lot already. It has health and things like that within it. But do you see that sort of like evolving? Do you see yourself getting more into credit? Do you see, how do you see the technology evolving? Maybe more an opportunity to kind of just like go ham, just, like unpack how you see the product, and it might not be the path, but this would be the ideal universe. Yeah.
No, thank you. That's a good question. Maybe answer it up for the second one. Do I go straight?
Okay, go ahead.
So we actually have a roadmap, and we are basically building an American Express Africa version for Boda Boda riders. So we want to give the Boda Boda. So we've identified that the top 600,000 Boda Boda riders are making good money. And we want to give them the best financial services they've ever dreamt of. So everything from insurance to healthcare to everything from insurance to credit to loyalty points to access to things they would never have dreamt of. Savings platforms. We're currently working with the SACCOs. We've even helped them submit some, if you notice in Kenya, the what do you call it? The finance bill had nothing to do with Boda Bodas. We've helped their association. We've gotten them some legal help so that they can make some submissions that are very relevant to them, because we also understand the problem statements that are affecting them. But the big idea is we build an American Express, give the top 600,000 to 1 million riders the best possible service, financial service, so that they can, every financial need that they ever think of and want, They'll be able just to pick up a phone, go to WhatsApp, go to an app, go send an email, and there'll be somebody from OA who will be ready to help them. So that's sort of the big idea there. And technology's role is basically to, I think we'll be the first to put all that, that type of platform, because we will be working with, it's basically a marketplace if you really think about it, specific to the boda sector. Thanks for that question, Samu. I hope that answers your
Okay,
question.
so yeah, so one last question from Abel. Abel, are you still with us? Kevin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, clearly.
Yeah.
Ah, okay,
I know
so
he had put a question in the window.
so
I just seem to have lost it. I don't know if you can see it,
okay,
Kevin.
I can read it. I can read it.
Okay.
So I'll just read it. I'm Abel from Ethiopia. As a startup launching the first product, what advice do you provide to gain trust of stakeholders? Hi, Abel. That's a great question. The hard truth is that the best thing to show, to build trust with the stakeholders, you have to have done something before to show that you sort of have the ability to do what you're saying. And so the best way to do something like this, if you are a rookie, is get somebody that is trusted by those stakeholders to front you. That's what I did in my last startup. I had a very well-respected chairman that would sort of get me into certain rooms that would be a bit hard for me at that stage in my career to get into. And then I always tell, I don't know about Ethiopia, but in Kenya, there's this very negative perception around PR, which I've never really understood. Because people assume that when you talk about yourself on social media and talk about your wins and whatnot, that you're boasting or you're trying to show off. But the reality is that if you've got a product and an idea and you think it's great, you better be shouting it from the mountaintops. And fear don't fear what people think. So understand what's your best mode of communicating. I used to write in 2018. Now I do these types of engagements where at least once a week I'm speaking to a group of 50 entrepreneurs or forums like this. I have a TikTok strategy that we're launching in literally 2 weeks. I'm very excited about that because I think it'll really expose me to a new audience that I've never really been in front of. And it's a whole different dynamic. We had to get cameras and setups and things like that. But you've got to figure out how you've got to win trust of an audience, and the best way to do that is by shouting about your idea. And over time, it gets easier. I can tell you that for a fact because I've seen it in my own life. And then when you're a rookie, get somebody who's already trusted to front you. And then to get that person that you need to front you, you've got to show the passion. And I'll repeat for the millionth time, discipline. Because discipline's everything. Consistency.
Okay. I don't see any more questions in the chat window unless you can see some, Kevin.
There's none.
Okay. All right. So unless there are any other pressing questions, I see we have about 17 minutes to go. And from my end, I'd just like to ask you for your parting shot for the audience. We've almost taken 2 hours of your time, and we're very grateful for that. I know when I spoke to you earlier, you were on site, so you had to dash, clean up, and remove the Oye jacket.
And wear a tie.
Reflector jacket. Put on a tie, So I know you had a very long day, but any parting shots for the audience, especially around our theme, resilience, motivating the team, and just around the theme of the glass half full, because we know it is a, as you said, it is a tough journey. But how do we make sure that those we have this time round in our BimaLab program, we will be telling their success stories in another year, 2 years, and they'll be having ambitious numbers like the ones you're talking about, of which we had some of them pitch in Kigali. So how do we make sure we keep motivating them and making them understand that this is the journey and this is how it's going to be, and we encourage them?
So if it's my parting shot, then one, I'd like to just start by saying thank you to Laura. I saw Tonya was on the call, and to the Telistic team. If I've forgotten anyone, I'm sorry. The IRA team, thank you so much for having me. The BimaLab team, thank you so much for having me. And to the entrepreneurs who listen, thank you for spending your evening listening to my stories. My parting shot is, maybe I'll just I'll use the glass half full mentality, sort of analogy, is, maybe let me frame it differently. Entrepreneurship is a science. It's not a guessing game. As a result, you've got to give it the respect it deserves, in the sense of you've got to understand the history of it. You've got to understand the fundamentals of entrepreneurship. I'll urge every entrepreneur to study the history of money and debt, because those are core ideas in entrepreneurship, and to understand capitalism as a system. I'm not saying that you take a view, I'm saying understand it. Once you understand it, understand what role you want to play in that game. And the best games are those that solve problems. Everyone here has a remote for their TV. If you really think about the problem it's solving, there's no one wants to stand up and change the channel on the TV. And that's how you should be thinking. How are you making people's lives better? It doesn't matter if you're in manufacturing, insurance, fintech, real estate. Is how you making people's lives better. And if you understand, what I was saying earlier about the fundamentals of capitalism and money, is you only capture value when you solve people's problems, because that's when people are willing to pay you for that value. The second point would be around self. Look after yourself. You've got a soul, you've got emotions, you've got a mental, and you've got physical. Each of those must work in harmony for you to be an optimized entrepreneur. So make sure that you're looking after yourself. Don't buy into the lie that sleeping 7 hours is for the weak. Your brain needs those 7 hours. Don't buy into the idea that you don't need family. You need family. You need friends. I'll urge you to have a very close-knit bunch of friends. There'll be your support system, and you laugh during the good times. And during the good times, they'll also ground you, because and I've experienced a little bit of it, when you get popular because of whatever reason, the world changes around you, and you sort of need those people who can tell you, laugh at you, call you out, because they ground you. But also during the tough times, they really sort of take care of you. Physically, the trick is, I started with 15 minutes. I'm now maybe at 18 minutes, so I'm not so far ahead, but just that daily 15 minutes of some physical exercise helps you with stamina, because once you've got the rhythm in your business, that stamina comes in very handy for surviving tough times. You need that mental will. And then, of course, mentally keep learning, have that learning mindset, focus on listening rather than talking. And then I have a general rule. And sometimes it offends people, but it's true. This is how I like living my life. Is you want to be the dumbest person in the room always. What that does is you find yourself constantly pushing to sit at different tables because you want to know more about a subject. And the more you know, the more you realize how intertwined the world is, and that's great for your mind. And then in conclusion, you know, I'll repeat what, you know, the famous Denzel, he says it all the time. I don't know why who gave it to him, but, you know, you need commitment to start, but you've got to have consistency to finish. And so that's sort of have that in the back of your head. Starting is the first step. Now the discipline is what gets you to the finish line. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kevin. It's been amazing having you. I love how you've been vulnerable enough to share your story from a personal and also from a business perspective. It's been very insightful for all of us, even for me from a personal perspective. I have learned, you know, so much of which I wish I had this like maybe 10 years ago. I would have been, you know, brave enough to have my own startup. But thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience with us. And for me, I'd also just like to recap some of the sound bites that I thought were, you know, are very important that touched me personally. The first thing for me was around trust. I think this is one thing that we may take lightly, but I think it's very important with whatever relationships you have, whether business or personal, whether employee or, you know, it doesn't matter. Whatever networks you build, I think trust is very important. I think the other thing that maybe we underestimate is what you said is about communication. And you talked about communication from a business perspective, where you look at it as what is the objective of what you're trying to solve, you know, whether it's Teams, whether it's email, whether it's WhatsApp, you must communicate. And I took it a step further and I was like, when you talked about communicating the bad news first when you're giving updates and all those things, I think that's very, very important. You must communicate and be vulnerable when you're communicating. Do not hide anything from those that matter, whether they're your employees, whether they're investors, whether it's your board, whether it's your friend, whether it's your family. You must communicate and be vulnerable when you're communicating. And the final thing that was so important to me is the time. An entrepreneur should look at time as an asset and not as an enemy. I think, as they say, time is money, but it's up to you as to how you want to look at it. You could be chasing time and chasing the time the wrong way as an enemy, but you could be chasing the time the right way, which is as an asset. So I think that's also very important for all of us to remember. And to my audience, thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate you hanging in there. I know one or two really appreciated Kevin's vulnerability when he talked about his partner, when it's shared openly. I do appreciate that. And I hope this will give you the resilience and the motivation to keep going with what you're building. Hang in there. I know the accelerator program can be very tough, but there's positive things that are going to come out of it. We are seeing an alumni of the accelerator program talking to us now and encouraging us through his journey. So we look forward to you also being able to pay it forward in the future. And I'd like to wish you all a fantastic rest of day or evening. I look forward to seeing all of you on Thursday in the workshop, and go and process what we've discussed today. It will be shared the recording will be shared with you. I'm sure you have a lot of stuff you need to reflect on a personal basis as a founder, as a co-founder, as a CEO, as the person pushing the solution that you're currently working on. Thank you all and have a fantastic rest of day and evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.